country song. We'll all be flying higher than a jetliner. And if you want a little bang in your yin yang, come along.
I don't care about payback. I think it's very important for our country to find out what happened.
Under long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional. Even if the charge is kept under seal and hidden from public view, that too is prohibited. Charging the president with a crime was therefore not an option we could consider.
Freedom is back in style. Welcome to the revolution.
Yeah, we're coming to your city. Gonna play our guitars and sing you a country song.
Sean Hannity. The new Sean Hannity Show. More behind-the-scenes information on breaking news and more bold, inspired solutions for America.
The Special Counsel's Office is part of the Department of Justice, and by regulation, it was bound by that department policy. Charging the president with a crime was therefore not an option we could consider. And beyond department policy, we were guided by principles of fairness. It would be unfair to potentially accuse somebody of a crime when there can be no court resolution of the actual charge. So that was Justice Department policy. Those were the principles under which we operated, and from them we concluded that we would not reach a determination one way or the other about whether the president committed a crime. That is the office's final position, and we will not comment on any other conclusions or hypotheticals about the president.
All right, hour two, Sean Hannity Show. Glad you are with us. Write down our toll-free telephone number. It's 800-941-SEAN if you want to be a part of the program. Understand what's happening here. Understand that this is exactly the opposite of how justice in America works. And all this was the special counsel literally just dropping little nuggets, innuendo hits when under our system of justice in America, if you don't have the evidence, you don't say we can't convict. You just don't charge. It's really that simple. And what Mueller did here is nothing but pure politics. If they had the evidence at all, in any way, shape, matter, or form, to prove any crime, be it collusion, conspiracy, whatever, so on and so forth, they would have brought those charges forward, and they would have made it clear. And what has happened here is it is just gone in the opposite direction for them. So it is, how do you defend against a never-ending cloud of innuendo over your head? And what are the long-term ramifications about this? Now, look, the effort to unseat a duly elected president continues. It's never going to stop. If Donald Trump cured cancer, if Donald Trump gave every American $10 million and he adopted even the Green New Deal and every left-wing policy that exists, they'd still hate him. And nor does it in any way deflect from all that we now know is coming with the declassification. That means the FISA warrant applications will come out. That means the 302s will come out. That means the exculpatory evidence that was hidden will come out. That means that all the closed-door testimony, it's all coming out. There's a second act to this, and it is going to be devastating to all of these deep state collaborators. Those, how Robert Mueller had time to look into, let's see, loan applications, taxes going back to the 80s, FARA violations, taxi medallions, but ignored what the New York Times is now suggesting was a Hillary Clinton bought and paid for, put together by a foreign agent, Russian disinformation that was used for the very specific reason of creating interference and even outcome of the 2016 election in favor of Hillary. to ignore it all is unconscionable. Now all of that is coming into the fray. As I said, go back to when Lindsey Graham interviewed the Attorney General, Barr. Barr said there was no consideration given when he made the decision, along with the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, with input from the Office of Legal Counsel, that this whole Justice Department policy issue of whether you can or cannot indict a sitting president never came into play. And what Robert Mueller said is dead wrong. If Robert Mueller wanted to come out and say this is what we found, he wouldn't have punted it to the Department of Justice. Anyway, we got full analysis, a lot of different angles to get to today. Andy McCarthy, the great attorney he is, formerly of the Southern District of New York, and of course, #1 best-selling author, legal analyst Greg Jarrett, the Russia hoax, and David Schoen, criminal and civil liberties defense attorney. How are you all? Welcome to the program. Greg, why don't we start with you today and your thoughts overall as we begin our analysis of this?
Well, once again, as he did in his report, the special counsel Robert Mueller seems to have reversed the burden of proof and inverted the presumption of innocence. Once again, he is saying we cannot prove the president did not commit a crime. Think about what that really means. It's a double negative. Mueller was contending he can't prove something that didn't happen. What if that's the standard for all investigations? Let's say you deposited your paycheck at a bank on Monday, the same day it's robbed, and then the prosecutor makes a public announcement he can't prove you didn't rob the bank, so you're neither criminally accused nor exonerated. The burden of proof has been shifted to you to disprove the negative. That's not the way our system of justice operates. But Mueller maligned Trump with a taint of criminality and depriving him of the presumption of innocence, and he did it once again today.
Your take, David Schoen.
Several points real quickly. Why did Mueller never say this before, that the sitting president couldn't be indicted? This was the subject of discussion day after day by the president's lawyers, how outrageous this was. Number two, if there was never could be a criminal prosecution of the president, and Mueller understood that, why was 600.1 of the regulations triggered? That requires a finding that there's a criminal prosecution or investigation of a person or matter that justice had a conflict with. Under 600.2, there were alternatives to this, including just an initial investigation. As Greg said, innuendo is tougher than a specific charge to defend against. You can't defend against it. And they make it worse by saying if there were no crime, then they would have made that clear. Last thing is, you can bet your bottom dollar that if they had evidence of a crime here with people like Andrew Weissman and Robert Mueller on this committee, in the special counsel's office, they would have laid that out. They would have said what the crimes were. They would have said their evidence, but we can't charge him because he's a sitting president.
Well, and your take, Andy McCarthy. I mean, if you decided when you work for the Southern District of New York not to indict somebody, you decided not to indict them. Do you go out there and say, well, do you leave a cloud of suspicion? Well, we think we might have been there, but we weren't there. And how do you reconcile the varying statements? I mean, if Rod Rosenstein, Office of Legal Counsel, the Attorney General, made what was a pretty clear, quick decision that had no basis or even considering this question of Justice Department policy about indicting a president of the United States while in office, he was clear that was not a consideration.
Well, Sean, I think now we have to really look at the timeline of that. Because what happened here, it looks to me like, is Mueller met with Barr on March 5th. That's when they say they had their first conversation, according to Barr's testimony. And as I understand it, it was at that meeting that Mueller repeatedly told Barr, I think Barr said 3 times, and he was emphatic about it, that the OLC guidance was not the reason why Mueller had decided not to make a decision about obstruction. And then Barr asked him, well, what is your reasoning? And Mueller said, we're still formulating that. And then by 2.5 weeks later, on March 22nd, when Mueller delivers the report, he has this whole section in the beginning of the obstruction part of the report that really lays it at the feet of the OLC guidance. So, I think that's probably what happened. That's probably why the Attorney General said what he said. And, it seems to me that Mueller, the one thing that Mueller decided was he wasn't going to decide. He didn't want to be the one to pull the trigger, and he couldn't come up with a coherent reason for not making the only decision that he was really arguably needed to make. I didn't think there should be a special counsel at all. And then at the last minute, he obviously decided, well, we'll lay it at the feet of the OLC guidance.
Well, but Mueller, everybody knew about Justice Department policy anyway, correct?
Well, they did, Sean, but, look, there's a big difference, and this is one of the things that really bothers me about Mueller. There is a big difference between the role of the prosecutor who is investigating the case and the Justice Department that has to enforce Justice Department policy. It was none of Mueller's concern that there's OLC guidance that says you can't indict a sitting president. The only thing Mueller needed to do as the prosecutor who was handling the case was tell the Justice Department, yes, there's enough evidence to charge, or no, there's not enough evidence to charge. And if he thought there was enough evidence to charge, then you tell the Justice Department that. And if the Attorney General at that point wants to invoke the policy that says a sitting president can't be indicted, then the Attorney General can invoke it. But there was no reason for the prosecutors working on the case to worry about that.
And
he's 100% right. And that decision, by the way, by the Attorney General should have been made on the front end. And that's the first point he made, that the special counsel never should have been appointed. The Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney General at this point, Rosenstein, well knew OLC policy and knew that there wouldn't be a criminal prosecution of the president under that policy. What Mueller told us today is what we knew. He has cost the taxpayers millions of dollars and paralyzed the presidency for 2 years for nothing.
Well, I think,
Sean, could I say one other thing?
Yeah.
Something that's got to be decided now that I think Barr was trying to sidestep. There's clearly a difference between Barr and Mueller about what the legal requirements are for obstruction. And I think Barr tried to sidestep that by saying, even if we apply Mueller's looser standard on the facts of the case here, the government would not be able to prove obstruction beyond a reasonable doubt. Now I think with Mueller's report out there and with Mueller saying, I can't say that this isn't a crime, it's really incumbent on the Justice Department and the Office of Legal Counsel at this point to step in and tell us what is the Justice Department's position on what obstruction law says. Is it Mueller's position or is it some other position?
All right, quick break. We'll come back. More on the other side with Andy McCarthy, David Schoen, and Greg Jarrett. Now, listen, people, you want to give away things. Sometimes you put even old furniture, you put it out in front of your house, and you wake up in the morning before the garbage men come and somebody took it away. Like, oh, one man's trash is another man's cash, right? But would you do that with something like your most expensive china or dining room set? The answer is absolutely not. Would you give away personal information, financial documents, passwords, social security numbers? Of course you'd never do that. But this is what you need to know. If you ever use public Wi-Fi, even password protected public Wi-Fi, you are literally giving away access to that most secret and important information to these cyber criminals. It's like putting it out on the front curb. Now, there's a way to protect yourself, and that's Norton Secure VPN. It's a virtual private network that encrypts all of your connections, even on public Wi-Fi, so the information that you're sending and you're receiving is safe from cyber criminals who want to steal your private information. Or, by the way, companies that want to track your browsing. It's simple to use. You log in once. It runs seamlessly in the background. Done. And it's only $3.33 a month. Now, you can get this virtual private network for yourself. Just go to norton.com/VPN. That's norton.com/VPN and protect all of your important information.
Immigration, jobs, healthcare. The news you care about is right here. Hannity Watch is on.
As we continue continue our three-attorney panel with Greg Jarrett and David Schoen and Andy McCarthy. 800-941-SEAN is our number. Bill O'Reilly at the top of the hour. You know, one of the interesting things, Greg Jarrett, is, you know, Mueller takes this position today, but if we look at the whole case, nobody was charged. He didn't even return one charge because there was no evidence as it relates to any of these issues. And then we get to the whole issue of what does the law mandate? I mean, then we get to the double standard issue because, okay, if there was no underlying crime, you never believed there was an underlying crime. You believed in your innocence. You proclaimed your innocence as the president did every single day. And while, you know, Don McGahn could say that he might have suggested firing Mueller, well, somebody else would have replaced Mueller because of a conflict of interest. That would be within the president's powers under Article 2, but the president never fired Mueller, never fired Rod Rosenstein, let the investigation go forward. He encouraged everybody in the White House publicly and privately to testify. They all did. 1.5 million documents handed over in the process of all of this, and saying that this is a witch hunt hardly is obstruction. Where is the obstruction?
Well, there is none. First of all, there are two U.S. Supreme Court decisions that say general statutes don't apply to a president who's exercising his constitutional authority unless those statutes say so. If you look at all of the obstruction statutes, they do not expressly apply to the president. So as a constitutional matter, in things like firing James Comey and the words allegedly uttered about Michael Flynn, those as a constitutional proposition do not qualify under obstruction of statute. But even if you accept some sort of expansive, elastic interpretation of obstruction as it applies to the president, for every allegedly incriminating finding in Mueller's report, there is a corresponding exculpatory explanation. So even there's no corrupt intent or improper purpose as obstruction requires. So on all fours, obstruction has no application to the president. What concerns me here is that Mueller's peddling two different stories. He says to the public that the OLC opinion, you can't charge a sitting president, prevented him from doing his job. And yet, according to Bill Barr's testimony and his statement to the media, he was specifically told by Mueller on 3 occasions that the OLC opinion has nothing to do with his decision. So somebody's not telling the truth here. And, I don't know who it is, but I'll tell you this much. Mueller's story doesn't really stand up.
All right, I want to pick up on that point when we get back. Greg Jarrett, Andy McCarthy, David Schoen with us. 800-941-SEAN, toll-free telephone number. We'll get Bill O'Reilly's take at the top of the next hour.
Keeping Uncle Sam accountable to you every day. Hannity is on.
We conducted an independent criminal investigation and reported the results to the Attorney General, as required by department regulations. Now, I hope and expect this to be the only time that I will speak to you in this manner. I am making that decision myself. No one has told me whether I can or should testify or speak further about this matter. There has been discussion about an appearance before Congress. Any testimony from this office would not go beyond our report. It contains our findings and analysis and the reasons for the decisions we made. We chose those words carefully, and the work speaks for itself. And the report is my testimony. I would not provide information beyond that which is already public in any appearance before Congress.
Yeah, but I'd love to get answers to questions. When did he know there was no collusion? I'd like to know, well, if you had time for taxi medallions, loan applications, taxes, and FARA violations, why didn't you have time for a foreign put-together, phony Russian dossier that was used as the basis of a FISA warrant before the election and after the election, paid for by the opposition party. Was that not, is the New York Times right in their description that it was very likely Russian disinformation? Maybe that's a little bit more important than taxi medallions and a little bit more important than FARA violations. I don't think Mueller wanted to answer any of these questions. So Democrats are doing what they do, which is, of course, there's Nadler out there. Of course, impeachment is on the table. Mueller found substantial evidence of obstruction of justice. No, he did not. Point out to me where that evidence is. Mueller could not charge Trump because of Justice Department rules. That's not even what he's saying. And the Attorney General, which, again, people like Nadler never wanted the Starr report, with 11 specific charges that Congress should look into with Bill Clinton. He didn't want that public. And the former law was changed into the current law, which was, we used to have, very different way of handling all of this. And we've gone over in detail. So, okay, what does this all mean? Anyway, we continue with Andy McCarthy, David Schoen, and Greg Jarrett, where it looks to me like Mueller just made a quick political statement with no substance in fact, when in fact the current law as it is written, the call was to be made by the Attorney General if he decided not to make one, Greg Jarrett.
Absolutely. And, I'm not sure I understand the whole point of Mueller's statement today that lasted about 10 minutes. Not going to take any questions. I'm not going to testify, which, by the way, he has no choice of doing if he receives a subpoena. He's not above the law. But so, this strikes me as yet another effort by Mueller to smear the president with the taint of criminality, when in fact his report, if you really dig through it, as I have 3 times, demonstrate that there's no obstruction of justice. And let me make one other point about the Office of Legal Counsel opinion. Go back and look at Barr's testimony before the Senate. He said that Mueller told him that there might be a case in which a president can be charged while sitting in office, and that the OLC opinion can be, quote unquote, abandoned. So, this whole thing strikes me as a bit of a charade by Mueller, again, to smear Trump.
And Andy McCarthy, your take on that part?
Well, Sean, I thought it was pretty presumptuous of him to say that, my testimony is the report, so I wouldn't have anything else to say. Can you imagine a lawyer telling the Court of Appeals when they ask you at a legal argument some questions about the position you've taken in your brief, and are you going to tell them, sorry, Your Honor, I've already said everything I had to say in the brief, and how dare you ask me any more questions? Of course, if he gets subpoenaed, he's going to have to come in and he's going to have to answer questions, and he's going to have to answer questions about his investigative decisions, which include, I think, the fact that he probably knew that there was no collusion case as early as, I'd say, probably September 2017, when they didn't go back to the FISA court and ask for another warrant on Carter Page. So there's a pretty important question here about, especially if they're going to try to push a lot of obstructive conduct that happened after that point, according to Mueller's own report. Why wasn't the president and why wasn't the country told that there was no collusion case against the president? I think things would have gone a lot differently if that had happened.
Yeah. And David, what were you going to say?
2 things. I think, first of all, Mueller owed, if this is his position, he owed that to the American public almost 2 years ago when the president's lawyers were saying it, about the OLC policy. But think about this other angle about what Mueller said today. He said, first of all, that Barr made more of the report public than he had to, and that Mueller appreciated that, and that Mueller would not go beyond any testimony, give any testimony beyond what's been made public in the report. Now, when Mr. Barr took that position, Nadler and Schiff called him essentially a traitor. He's going to be thrown out of office, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see what they say about Mr. Mueller taking that same position, because he's been their hero for quite a while.
So basically we're dealing with politics, not the law, Greg. That is the way I'm hearing this.
Oh, absolutely. And, again, if you read the special counsel report, it's 448 pages of politics. and not so much the law. And it's almost as if you can tell that Mueller and his team of partisans knew that there was no legal basis for an obstruction case against the president. And so they sort of twisted the facts and tried to contort the law to create the suggestion, to imply that it might be possible. But trust me, if they had evidence of a case against the president, Mueller would have said so explicitly, and he would have moved to, as he told Barr, abandon the Office of Legal Counsel opinion that you can't charge a sitting president. That's an advisory opinion. It is not binding. It is not mandatory. This is our opinion. But according to Mueller, he is free to abandon it in a case where there's solid evidence.
Well, it seems to me that any investigation, if this is the practice, and Andy, I mean, you run some very high profile cases, the blind sheikh among them, and in the first World Trade Center issues. If that's the case, then basically prosecutors can leave a cloud hanging over anybody anytime, even though there is not evidence that rises to the level of an indictment. And that is a troublesome, I think, precedent for the country. Either you've got it or you don't. And we know that there's no hidden indictment, and we know that the Attorney General's decision did not even factor into any consideration Justice Department policy, but based on the facts as presented in the report, it did not rise to any level of any crime.
Yeah, well, Sean, that's why I think you really have to now get straightened out what the Justice Department's position is on obstruction, because I don't think Mueller's position on the legal elements of obstruction is the same as the Attorney General's, and I think that has to be straightened out. But as to your other point, look, it's the rule of the road in the Justice Department that the government speaks in court. You speak when you are ready to formally charge someone, because it's at that point in our system that an accused is given all of the rights that are guaranteed under the Constitution to confront a government's charge. So at that point, it's a fair fight. What prosecutors are not supposed to do is collect information for the sake of collecting it and then publicize it in a way that taints and convicts someone in the court of public opinion. That's simply not supposed to happen. And, I would point out that Rod Rosenstein, who ran this investigation in the sense of supervising it for a very long time, fired Jim Comey as the FBI director for speaking about the evidence in the Hillary Clinton case because Mrs. Clinton hadn't been charged. That was the whole rationale for removing Comey. So, to take that position and then to see this happen here is really, it's difficult to square.
All right, quick break. More with Andy McCarthy, Greg Jarrett, and David Schoen on the other side, and Bill O'Reilly at the top of the hour. But first, we've all heard these stories. A law-abiding citizen, home invasion, whatever the situation, you defend your family, they send the homeowner to jail. Yeah, that happens, unfortunately, a lot. But that's where our friends at the USCCA step in, because they're dedicated to educating and training and protecting law-abiding Americans just like you and me every day. Now, this week, they're going to give you a free guide, free audiobook about exactly what to do if this, God forbid, ever happens to you and your family. It is called the Complete Concealed Carry and Family Defense Guide, 100% free. You'll learn to see attackers before they see you. What happens, God forbid, you're in a mass shooting scenario? What do you do? What is the best tactical place when you're out in public, like in a restaurant? And much more. It's 164 pages, life-saving information. It has a complete audio book. And you'll also get for free the USCCA's Home Defense Checklist. That's free. You can share it with your church and your schools. And all you have to do is pull out your phone and text the word FREE, F-R-E-E, to 87222. Text the word FREE to 87222, 87222 from our friends at the USCCA.
Roundup is next. You do not want to miss it. And stay tuned for the final hour free-for-all on the Sean Hannity Show.
And as we continue with David Schoen, Greg Jarrett, Andy McCarthy, let's go back to Barr's testimony and an exchange that he had with Lindsey Graham, because from this day forward, once the Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, once they made their decision, after the Mueller report came in, it was made quickly that they were not moving forward with any prosecution in any way. Whether with all the noise that we'll hear from Congress and in the media mob, Mueller is still a dead issue. But all of these other issues are very much alive, and we know the Inspector General awaits, Huber awaits. We now have Durham investigating on his side, and we have the Attorney General promising full investigations into all of this.
Do you share my concerns about the FISA warrant process?
Yes.
Do you share my concerns about the counterintelligence investigation, how it was opened and why it was opened?
Yes.
Do you share my concerns that the lack of professionalism in the Clinton email investigation is something we should all look at?
Yes.
Do you expect to change your mind about the bottom line conclusions of the Mueller report?
No.
Do you know Bob Mueller?
Yes.
Do you trust him?
Yes.
How long have you known him?
30 years, roughly.
You think he had the time he needed?
Yes.
You think he had the money he needed?
Yes.
You think he had the resources he needed?
Yes.
Do you think he did a thorough job?
Yes, and I think he feels he did a thorough job and had adequate evidence to make the calls.
Do you think the president's campaign in 2016 was thoroughly looked at in terms of whether or not they colluded with the Russians?
Yes.
And the answer is no, according to Bob Mueller.
That's right.
He couldn't decide about obstruction. You did. Is that correct?
That's right.
You feel good about your decision?
Absolutely.
So, Andy, to me, I hear that the Attorney General, I mean, they'd love to smear him, but the bottom line is he had the final say on this. It's still over.
Well, it's over as far as a prosecution matter is concerned. Now, the problem here, Sean, is that what Mueller essentially said today was, and this is exactly the political signaling that I think my fellow panelists are pointing to. What Mueller said was, if I could have said there was no obstruction, I would have. I didn't say that. I didn't say there was obstruction, but that's because there's Office of Legal Counsel guidance that prevented me from saying that. And by the way, in this system, it's for Congress, not federal prosecutors, to discipline a president who has been accused of committing misconduct. So it seems to me that what he has basically done for the Democrats is to signal to them, hey, look, guys, I could have found felonies here, and the only thing that stopped me was the Office of Legal Counsel guidance, and you guys don't even need felonies, so here you go, and the Constitution says it's on you to take care of the president, have at it. And, it just seems to me that's the argument that got made today, which is why, as far as people who are pushing for impeachment are concerned, I think they got a turbocharge today.
Yeah, well, again, that's a political process, and that's very different.
Right.
Greg, we have spoken at length with the declassification last week, and now the Attorney General having access to everything. I would assume the big 5 buckets we always talk about will become public. And when that happens, as I've been saying, well, the curtain is now rising on the second act of this entire saga, and it is going to be brutal in terms of what people are going to learn that was done in the 2016 election, what was done to save a failed candidate that should have been indicted, what was done with real Russian disinformation paid for and leaked to the media to impact the 2016 elections, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think the Russian hoax is about to unravel, and we will, I think, learn the details. And it'll come to us not only through these declassifications that you refer to, but the Inspector General's report as well. I mean, I think there is a lot of evidence of corrupt acts, improper acts by officials at the FBI and to some extent the Department of Justice, that they were putting their thumb on the scales in a presidential election. So much discussion about Russian interference in the election. How about FBI and Department of Justice interference in the election by using opposition research paid for by Hillary Clinton and Russian disinformation in order to damage a presidential candidate, and thereafter, upon his election, to try to frame him for something he didn't do. And I think Americans will be surprised by this, and I think there'll probably be some criminal referrals, and evidence will likely, I think, be presented to a grand jury if William Barr goes in that direction.
All right, I want to thank you all for the time today. Greg Jarrett, David Schoen, Andy McCarthy, three of the smartest attorneys I know. We'll have a lot more on Hannity tonight. Thank you all for joining us.
American way. Of course, the next best thing to a seat in the stands is the seat in front of a 19-inch RCA Victor television. One more day to Labor Day weekend, the traditional occasion for tasty outdoor barbecues or picnics.